palace shone like morning light caught in glass. Every wall and pillar seemed alive, reflecting soft colors from the high sky. Princess Lyra walked down the long hall, her gown trailing behind her like rippling silver. The air felt too still, too quiet, and she could hear her own heart beating faster than her steps. Today was supposed to be a day of peace. The great families had gathered in the royal court to celebrate an agreement that would bring calm after years of tension between distant lands. But peace was not what filled Lyra's chest. She felt trapped. Her mother, Queen Marin, had announced that Lyra must marry Lord Kale, a man from the neighboring kingdom. The marriage was meant to strengthen bonds, to join two powerful families into one. Everyone called it destiny. Lyra called it a cage. She had met Lord Kale only twice, and both times he had smiled without warmth. His words were careful, his gestures perfect, but behind his polished grace was a cold emptiness. He seemed to love the idea of power more than the idea of love itself. Lyra had tried to object when her mother told her about the wedding, but Queen Marin had silenced her with a single glance. "A princess must not feel, only serve," the queen had said. Now the court bustled with guests wearing robes that shimmered like rivers. Servants rushed to place bowls of shining fruit and pitchers of sweet wine on long tables lined with gold edges. Lyra stood beside the queen's seat, trying to smile when spoken to. Every breath felt heavy. Every glance reminded her that she was being watched, weighed and measured like a jewel that must fit perfectly in its setting. In the far corner, a group of visitors from another world waited quietly. They were all human like her, though from a place much smaller, younger, and simpler. They had come from Earth as observers of the peace ceremony, invited to witness history. Among them stood a man named Ethan Cole, who seemed out of place in the grand hall. He was tall but plain, his dark hair uncombed, and his clothes neat but modest. He did not belong to high families or courts. Ethan was a scholar, a student of language, chosen only because he could speak and read the old scripts. Lyra noticed him for the first time when he turned to study one of the tall crystal pillars near her. He did not stare like others often did, he observed, as if he were trying to understand the meaning behind every line and shimmer. For a reason she could not explain, she looked again. His eyes were curious, calm, alive in a quiet way that was rare in this hall of proud faces. Lord Kale entered the room then, dressed in dark silver, every thread perfect, his smile practiced and shallow. The music began to swell, and the queen rose to greet him. Lyra's stomach turned as she tried to remind herself why she was doing this. It was for duty, for peace, for the people. That was what everyone said. But her heart refused to listen. As the ceremony began, the musician's slow rhythm echoed against the marble, and Lyra's mind drifted. She saw the Earth's guests standing near the back. Ethan stood among them, hands folded, observing with quiet respect. For a moment, her eyes met his across the hall. The noise faded, the music softened. It was as if time decided to pause. Ethan's expression changed slightly when their gaze locked. It was not the bold look of a man admiring a princess. It was something gentler, recognition, as though he saw her not as royalty but as a person. Lyra froze. Her throat felt tight. The air around her seemed lighter yet strange, like the first breath after rain. When she tried to turn back to the ceremony, she stumbled over her next line in the pledge. The queen glanced sharply at her, and Lord Kale frowned as though insulted. The guests whispered among themselves. Lyra forced herself to recover, finishing the words with a trembling smile. But even as she spoke, she knew something had shifted. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of golden lights, loud laughter, and long speeches. But the princess did not hear most of it. She kept seeing that calm, steady face in the crowd. She told herself that it meant nothing, that it was only a moment of distraction. Yet a quiet voice in her heart whispered that everything had changed. Later that night, when the halls emptied and only the moonlight rested on the marble, Lyra stood at the tall balcony and looked up at the stars. Far below, the gardens shimmered. Somewhere out there, the court would soon announce the date of her wedding. Her mother would smile proudly. The council would call it triumph. Lyra, however, could not stop thinking of the moment when her world had gone silent. She could not stop thinking of the man who had looked at her and seen not a princess, not a duty, but simply a person. And though she did not understand why, a strange warmth settled deep inside her chest, and she knew that nothing would ever be simple again. The next morning was clear and bright, but Princess Lyra felt none of the light in her heart. The palace gardens were full of singing fountains and soft wind, but she hardly noticed them. Her thoughts kept circling back to the day before, to the moment she had looked across the hall and met the eyes of the young man from Earth. She told herself it was foolish. He was only a visitor. She was a princess who had been promised to another. Yet the memory stayed, strange and stubborn, refusing to fade the way dreams do at sunrise. Ethan Cole spent the morning studying the carvings along the west corridor of the palace. The walls were covered in words written in an old language that few still understood. He traced one symbol with his fingertips, mouthing the sounds quietly. When one of the local scholars passed by and saw this, she smiled with surprise. "You read like one of us," she said. He gave a shy nod, pretending not to notice the curious glances of the guards nearby. He had no idea that his name had already reached the ears of the Queen's daughter. Lyra walked down the same corridor that afternoon, trying to escape another long meeting about her wedding plans. She had told her handmaid Lila that she only wanted a moment of air, but truly she wanted a moment of silence where no one reminded her of her duty. When she turned the corner, she stopped short. There he was again, standing under the tall window where sunlight poured like water down the stone. His back was toward her, and for a while she simply watched him in wonder. Ethan turned suddenly, startled to find the princess herself standing there. He bowed quickly, unsure of what to say. "Your Highness," he said softly, almost whispering the words. Lyra felt something like laughter rise inside her, but kept her face calm. "You do not need to speak so low," she said. "This corridor is quieter than the council hall." He smiled, awkward but genuine. "Forgive me," he said. "It is my first time in a palace. I thought I should whisper so I do not wake the walls." Lyra laughed then, a real laugh, free and unplanned. The sound echoed lightly through the corridor. "You think the walls sleep?" she asked. Ethan shrugged gently. "Maybe not. But they listen, I think. Every palace must keep the stories of its people." Lyra looked around her at the endless carvings that decorated the walls. Then they must be tired from carrying so many stories. For a long moment, neither spoke. There was no one else in the hall, only the soft hum of the fountains outside and the fragile stillness between them. Lyra looked at him again, at the simple way he stood, unguarded, unafraid, though he knew he stood before a princess. Everyone else around her bowed too deeply, smiled too carefully. This man did none of those things. It was as if he saw through the crown she wore, saw the person beneath. He asked politely, "May I ask what these symbols mean? I think they tell a story, but some of the words are older than anything I know." Lyra walked toward the wall beside him. "They tell of peace born from courage," she said. "A story my teacher made me read again and again as a child." "Do you believe it?" he asked. She turned to him. "Believe what?" "That peace can be born from courage," he said. She thought for a long moment. "I do not know," she said softly. "I was taught that peace comes from obedience, but obedience has always felt like silence to me." Ethan looked at her then, his eyes thoughtful. "Maybe courage is the kind of peace that does not need silence." Lyra drew in a slow breath. His words felt simple but heavy, as if they carried some truth she had not been allowed to see before. When their eyes met again, something quiet and strong passed between them. It was not the look of a servant to a princess, nor of a scholar to a mystery. It was more human than that, more real. Bell rang in the distance, calling the court to the evening meal. Lyra turned quickly, remembering where she was. "I must go," she said, and stepped away. Before she left, she paused and looked back at him once more. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" he asked. "For speaking to me as if I were not wearing a crown," she said. That night, when she sat by her mother's side in the grand hall, she tried to focus on the endless speeches and songs. Yet her mind wandered to the quiet corridor, the light through the window, and the man who had spoken so easily about courage and peace. She wondered what his world was like, what his people valued, how they lived without the weight of thrones and heavy promises. Ethan lay awake in his small guest room, looking out at the sky. The stars here seemed closer than the ones he knew back home. He thought of the princess's laughter, of the way it had surprised her as much as it had surprised him. She smiled to himself, unsure why the memory mattered so much. He told himself it was only admiration, born from curiosity and respect. But deep inside, he sensed something beginning to take shape, something that no study or language could explain. Outside, the palace slept under the calm sky. Both of them remained awake, thinking of the same quiet moment that had made the world feel different. Days turned into weeks, and the palace began to change in quiet ways. Every morning, Princess Lyra joined her mother at meetings to plan the wedding, yet her heart no longer rested in those rooms. Each time she sat beside the queen, her mind drifted to the west corridor, where the sunlight caught the carvings on the walls. She could still hear Ethan's calm voice asking questions about the symbols and courage. It was strange how a few words could echo louder than 1,000 orders. Ethan continued his studies in the palace library, translating the old writings for the court scholars. He came only as a guest, but soon everyone began to notice how often the princess visited the same hall. At first, people believed it was simple curiosity. The princess was known for her love of history. Then the whispers started, soft, uncertain, spreading like a slow wind through the servants' rooms and council halls. Queen Marin heard them too. One evening she called Lyra into her private chamber. The room was large and still, filled with the scent of burning candles and the faint hum of the night outside. The queen turned from the window, her robe trailing like shadow. "Lyra," she said in a voice both cool and strong, "I have heard that you spend time with a scholar from Earth. Is this true?" Lyra stood tall, her heart racing. "Yes, mother. I have spoken with him a few times. He has great respect for our history and has helped some of the scholars understand the old language." The queen studied her face carefully. "And is that all?" Lyra looked down, unable to answer at once. "He asks questions others do not ask," she said slowly. "He listens when I speak, not as a princess, but as a person." Silence filled the room. The queen's eyes softened for a moment, but then her voice grew firm again. "You must remember who you are. A princess serves the kingdom before herself. The man from Earth cannot give you the life that was chosen for you. He has no power, no title, nothing we can build on." Lyra's voice trembled, but she kept it steady. "And yet he has something I have never found in this palace. He has honesty." Queen Marin turned away, her face unreadable. "You speak like a dreamer," she said. "But dreams do not rule kingdoms." When Lyra left the room, her chest felt tight. She walked through the empty halls until she reached the balcony where the wind touched her face. "The stars were bright," she whispered quietly. "Then maybe I was not meant to rule a kingdom that fears dreams." Below in the courtyard, Ethan passed by the same balcony. He looked up and saw her standing there in the moonlight. He hesitated, unsure if he should speak, but she called out softly, "You cannot sleep either." He smiled faintly. "No. These walls carry too many secrets. They do not let me rest." Lyra leaned on the railing and said, "Tell me about your world. Tell me what it is like." Ethan thought for a moment. "It is noisy," he said first, and she laughed. "There is no palace, no queen, no golden halls. But there are people who dream every day of something greater, even if they have little. Sometimes they fall, sometimes they fail, but they always stand again. We do not live forever, but that makes every moment precious." Lyra listened closely. "You speak as if you love your world deeply," she said. "I do," he admitted. "But I think I could love any world where truth is worth more than titles." They talked for a long time, their voices blending with the sound of the wind. Lyra spoke of the weight of duty, of how her days were written for her, before she was even born. Ethan listened without judgment. "Maybe your story is only half written," he said quietly. "Maybe the rest belongs to you." The next morning brought gray skies and whispers louder than before. The council had noticed the princess's unusual behavior. Lord Kale himself heard of her late conversations with the human scholar. At breakfast, he spoke to her in a voice thick with anger disguised as charm. "Your friendship with that man is being discussed everywhere," he said. "I hope you realize how foolish it makes you look." Lyra met his eyes and replied calmly, "Perhaps it is not I who looks foolish. Those who believe kindness is weakness." He rose sharply, but before he could answer, the queen entered the hall. The conversation ended there. but the damage was done. By nightfall, the news had spread through every corner of the palace. Servants whispered behind closed doors, guards exchanged quiet glances, and the queen sat alone in her chamber, thinking of her daughter's sharp defiance. Ethan received a message that evening telling him he might soon be asked to leave.
Oh, yes.
He understood at once what it meant. Still, when he saw Lyra again the next day, he only smiled and said, "Sometimes storms come before the sky clears." Lyra's heart ached at the thought of him leaving, yet his words stayed with her, strong and calm, like an unseen promise. She sensed that the story neither of them had planned was just beginning, and no council or crown could stop it from unfolding. The morning began quiet, but the sky seemed uneasy, covered in gray clouds that refused to move. The palace guards changed their posts with quick steps, and the air carried a strange weight. Princess Lyra stood by her window, watching the horizon. It was supposed to be the day of a royal announcement, the first step toward her wedding with Lord Kale. The queen wanted the world to see strength and order. Yet Lyra felt only dread, a sense that something was breaking apart inside and outside of her. In the guest quarters, Ethan packed his small bag carefully. He'd received a sealed letter from the royal council at dawn. It thanked him for his work, praised his skill, and politely asked him to return to Earth within the week. His heart sank as he folded the letter, placing it gently on the table. He had known this might happen, but had still hoped for more time. The memory of Lyra's laughter, her clear eyes, her questions about truth and courage, all of it had changed him. Now he was leaving, carrying questions with no answers. As the day began, the palace filled with music, banners, and guests. The queen appeared calm, but she noticed Lyra's pale face and tight grip on her gown. "You will smile," Queen Marin whispered firmly. "You will stand with pride when the council speaks." Lyra nodded, but her eyes drifted again toward the windows, toward the storm that seemed to thicken in the far distance. Then it happened. At first, it was only a low sound, far away, like thunder rolling across the shallow sky. But it grew louder, closer. The floor trembled. The banners above the court began to sway. The guests looked around, confused. One of the guards ran into the hall, shouting that an attack had begun at the city walls. No one had expected it. The outer defenses burned bright against the dark sky as flashes of light broke the calm of the morning. Panic spread quickly. Servants rushed to protect the queen, while the council ordered the gates sealed. Lyra's heart pounded as she listened to the cries echoing through the corridors. She turned to her mother. "We must help the people," she said. "They are not ready for this." "You will stay inside," the queen ordered. "It is not safe beyond these walls." Lyra took one step forward. "What kind of safety is silence while others suffer?" she said. Before the queen could stop her, she ran toward the main doors. Guards tried to follow, but Lyra knew the palace better than anyone. She slipped through a side passage leading toward the lower grounds. Outside, the air was thick with smoke and sand. The city beyond the tall walls glowed with firelight. People ran in fear, carrying their children and belongings. Lyra rushed forward, helping a young boy who had fallen near the fountain. Just as she lifted him, strong arms pulled her back. She turned and saw Ethan, his clothes dusty, his face marked with worry. "What are you doing here?" she asked, breathless. "I could ask you the same," he said, setting the boy to safety behind the broken wall. "I came to help. I couldn't leave without trying." The sound of distant blasts shook the ground again. Lyra covered her ears. "They will break through the gates," she said. "Then we stop them," Ethan said simply. He picked up a fallen guard's staff and turned toward the outer path. Lyra followed beside him. They reached a group of frightened villagers trying to cross the square. Together, Ethan and Lyra guided them toward the inner gate where the palace soldiers were gathering. For every burst of smoke and sound, Ethan shielded her as best he could. She tried to protest, but he looked back and said, "You can rule later. Right now, just live." When the largest tower was hit, part of the wall collapsed with a roar. Dust and stone filled the air. Lyra stumbled, and Ethan caught her arm just before she fell. He pulled her away from the flames and into the shelter of the stable. Both were breathless, covered in soot. Lyra looked at him through the half-light. "Should not have stayed," she said. He smiled faintly, though his eyes were tired. "I could not have gone and left you here." For a moment neither spoke. Outside, The noise faded slightly as the palace soldiers pushed back the attackers. Then a new light glowed from the far end of the city, brighter than fire, signaled that reinforcements had arrived. The sound of retreat began to echo through the streets, and the battle slowed. Lyra stepped out from the stable, trembling. Ethan limped beside her, blood on his sleeve. The Queen's soldiers surrounded them and led them back inside the palace. Queen Marin rushed forward, tears breaking through her stern calm, when she saw her daughter alive. Ethan bowed low, weak from exhaustion. "You saved her," the Queen said softly. "I did what anyone should do," Ethan replied. Lyra reached for her mother's hand. "No, Mother. He did what courage demands." That night, the fires outside finally dimmed. The air smelled of rain, and the city was quiet at last. In the silent courtyard, Ethan sat by the fountain, looking at the stars through the smoke-filled air. Lyra came and sat beside him without a word. They sat until dawn, tired but alive, knowing that the battle had changed everything. The walls of duty and power were still standing, yet something far stronger had begun to rise among them, a feeling neither of them dared name, but both silently understood. The city healed slowly after the long night of fire. Ash still rested on the palace roofs like gray snow, and the smell of smoke clung to the air. The people worked together to rebuild their homes, carrying stones and wood with quiet strength. In every corner someone whispered the same story: the princess who had run into danger and the humble man who had saved her. No one knew exactly what had happened during those terrible hours, but all agreed that courage had been born in the middle of fear. Inside the palace, the Queen kept to her chambers for many days. She spoke to no one, thinking over everything that had passed. When she finally came out, she asked to see her daughter and the young scholar who had stayed behind. Lyra entered the room first, her hands folded, her dress still marked with ash. Ethan followed, uncertain what to expect. He had planned to leave quietly once the roads were open again, but the message from the Queen had stopped him. Queen Moran looked at them in silence. The candles flickered behind her, their light soft on her face. "This palace still stands because of what you two did," she said at last. "If you had not acted, many would have been lost." Ethan bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, I only did what I could. The soldiers were the ones who saved your city." The Queen's eyes turned to her daughter. "And you, Lyra, why? Did you not stay inside as I told you?" Lyra met her gaze without fear. "'Cause I could not rule a people I was not willing to fight for." For a long moment the Queen said nothing. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and then, to everyone's surprise, a small, tired smile appeared. "You sound like your father," she said quietly. "He had the same heart. Perhaps I was wrong to try to protect you from the fire. Perhaps courage is not learned in safety." Lyra stepped forward. "Mother, I love our people. I love our home. But I cannot give my life to a marriage that means nothing to me. I cannot join my name with one who sees only power." The Queen turned to Ethan, her face once again unreadable. "And what do you say, young man from Earth? What is it that you want?" Ethan hesitated, unsure of what words were allowed in such a place. "I want nothing that would take from her what is already hers," he answered. "I only wish to stand where I am welcome and to live with truth." The Queen nodded slowly. She looked at her daughter, then back at him, as if weighing something within her heart. "You both speak like dreamers," she said at last, yet her voice carried no scorn. "But perhaps it is dreamers who teach kingdoms how to live again." When they left her chamber, Lyra breathed deeply, relief and hope mixing together for the first time. The council still debated the wedding for many days, and Lord Kale, bitter and proud, demanded the promise be kept. But the Queen stood firm. Publicly, she announced that the marriage would not take place. She declared a new alliance, one built not through forced unions but through truth and shared courage. Many were shocked, yet few dared to question a queen who had seen her city burn and stand again. The news spread quickly across every land. The story of the human scholar and the princess who defied a crown reached far villages. Carried by travelers who spoke with wonder, what began as scandal soon became legend. Months passed. The palace gardens bloomed again, and the laughter of children returned to the streets. Ethan remained in the kingdom, now serving as a teacher for the young scholars who wished to learn about Earth and its stories. The Queen often invited him to council meetings where his simple wisdom won quiet respect. One evening, Lyra met him in the same corridor where they had first spoken months ago. The carvings still covered the walls, shining under the warm light of the setting sun. Lyra traced one symbol with her fingers. "Do you remember what you told me here?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "I said that courage might be the kind of peace that does not need silence." She nodded and turned to him. "You were right. I used to think peace meant standing still. Now I think peace means standing true." They walked together toward the balcony, where the sky glowed gold and orange. The city below was full of life again. Bells rang in the distance, not for war, but for joy. Lyra looked up at the open sky and said, "I once thought duty was my whole world. But maybe the world is bigger than duty. Maybe it is made of choices," Ethan said. "And maybe we are lucky if we get to make even one that is our own." She turned to him then, smiling in a way that carried no uncertainty. "So this is what courage feels like," she said softly. He took her hand, not as a servant takes the hand of nobility, but as one person takes another, when both have walked through storm and fire together. The wind moved gently through the balcony arches, carrying the faint scent of blooming roses. Far behind them in the grand hall, the queen stood at the window watching in silence. Her eyes were bright, not with sorrow but peace. She had given her daughter the one gift no crown had ever offered before, the right to choose her own life. The sun sank low, burning red against the edge of the horizon. Lyra and Ethan stood together, the light wrapping around them like a quiet promise. They said no vows, no grand words, yet in that soft evening glow, the truth between them was clear. Where duty had failed, love had built something stronger. And on that balcony, as the stars began to appear, the kingdom learned a new lesson, that sometimes the most powerful force in any world begins not with command or fear, but with a single, honest heart choosing another.